Welcome back to another Overwatch Coach video. We're going to do a tier list today, but instead of just doing support this time, we're going to cover the entire roster of Overwatch 2 up until the Remacha release. So this is a Season 2 kind of end of life tier list as it stands now. There's roughly 10 or 11 days left of Season 2. So we're coming down to the last nitty gritty of it here. So I thought I'd make a tier list here. And we're going to start with support since I believe the majority of my audience is support players. But we're going to cover everything here. So we're going to start with Ana. Ana is going to be S tier in my opinion. Anti-nades are still king of the hill in terms of support. If you can land sleeps, antis, and if you're able to land antis consistently, Kiriko will not, it's just not possible to keep up with it. So anybody looking to climb, especially climbing into the topper tier ranks, being good at Ana, definitely high recommendation for Ana. Baptiste is going to be a B tier for me. In terms of B tier, I feel like he can definitely put out some damage if you're good at hit scan. And he can spit out the heals kind of in the same ballpark of like what Moira can do, except there's a little bit of a skill shot to his heal with the heal nade. His shift ability is pretty strong. The lamp can be good if used in the right circumstances. Not a big fan of his ultimate. It's not a terrible ult, and it definitely has its uses, but it's a situational one. So B tier basically means that BAP is good in the right hands, but if you're kind of learning them or if you're forcing it into situations you don't really need them, there definitely could potentially be other picks out there that could be better. As far as Brigitte goes, that's going to be D tier. Brig is in a rough spot, and honestly, the only times I feel like you can kind of make a Brig work are with other heroes that don't really fit into the game at the moment. Ball is like the number one that kind of comes to mind. Her shield buff that she recently got with the 50 extra HP, it helps, but it doesn't help a lot. I've played around with her a little bit on my own. Honestly, the only time I've ever really found Brig to be useful in Overwatch 2 is when there's some divey tanks and they're not really dying and you need some kind of a support type character to kind of brawl with them a little bit. That kind of a thing. But she's in a rough spot. And from what I hear, her ultimate rework has been pushed to Season 4. So Brig is going to be in a rough spot for a while yet. I'm still curious to see what that ultimate for her is going to be. But yeah, for right now, D tier. Moira, I'm also going to put her into B tier. I kind of see her and BAP kind of in the same light. They push out a lot of stats, but their utility is questionable. BAP, I think, has a little bit more utility than Moira, but I think the most opportune time, in my opinion, to play Moira is when the enemy isn't running a bunch of one-shot, one-kill characters. If they're not doing that and they're doing a lot of more like trickle type damage where it's like, let's say a soldier shooting off from a distance, like a Sim or a Torb or a Genji, a Mei, even a Cassidy, I would say, Tracer, I think I said that one already. But yeah, like characters like that aren't so one-shot, one-kill material. I think that's kind of where Moira is in BAP to some extent as well. That's kind of their area to shine. But if there's a lot of one-shot, one-kill type characters floating around on the map, you probably want to stay away from, definitely from Moira. Bap, you might be able to maybe make work with the lamp, but still might be some better choices out there. Mercy. I'm going to put Mercy at A tier. And the only reason I'm saying she's A tier is it's completely dependent on what your team is running. If you run Mercy with a lot of those non-one shot, one kill type characters, you know, like, again, the Tracers and the Soldiers, although Soldier's not terrible for Mercy, but like, let's say Tracer, Sim, Torb, I'm trying to think here who else would kind of fit into that category. Sombra would definitely fit into it. Mei would fit into it. Reaper would fit into it. A lot of those characters that are a little bit more on the brawly side, I feel like Mercy doesn't really benefit in that kind of a situation. But if your team's running like Sojourn, even though Sojourn's been nerfed a bit and she's still not, and now she's not as strong with the Mercy pocket, I still would suggest Mercy pocketing a Sojourn, an Ashe, a Widowmaker, a Hanzo. Soldier's fine to do it. Not the best, but not the worst. Characters like that, those are the ones to be running Mercy with. But if your DPS aren't running those kind of characters, also Pharah and Echo might warrant a Mercy pocket as well. So there's a lot of DPS out there that can definitely benefit from a Mercy pocket. So that's why I put her at A tier. She's definitely above and beyond, I'd say, the majority, but there might be a couple other better picks out there. Lucio, I'm sliding down to B tier from where I last had him at. Lucio, in my opinion, is warranted on a few things. One, what is your tank playing? So, for example, if they're playing like Reinhardt, then Lucio could be good. But it also warrants what is your other support playing. Say, for example, you have a Diva on your team, and you also have a Mercy. Lucio's probably not going to be that good of a pick. Lucio beat drops are still great for countering potential Genji Blades, Reaper ult, what else? Junkrat Tire to some extent, Mei ult to some extent, Torb ult can be good for that, Sigma ult, Diva Bomb if you time it right. Sojourn ult, I suppose, too, could be good for that. You know, so Lucio definitely has a role to play, but the problem is that it has to fit into the right team comp, and that's not always going to be the case. You can't, I definitely don't suggest one-tricking Lucio quite yet, although with the nerf to Roadhog, that definitely is going to help Lucio, and same with the Sojourn nerf, that's definitely going to help him. But until some of this one-shotting kind of gets a little bit more under control, if that even happens, Lucio's going to be in a rough spot, but you can definitely make him work. He's definitely playable, but it's going to take a little bit more team coordination to make him work. So next is Kiriko, and I'm putting her at S tier even after her nerf. She got a nerf to her healing output, the speed of her reload for that. I do notice it a little bit when I play Kiriko, but I don't think she's in that rough of a spot. And until Ana anti-nades become not as strong as they currently are, Kiriko is still going to be an important pick. And on top of that, when you've got so many tanks that can't shield themselves from incoming damage of, say, for example, an Ana nade, like Junker Queen, Orisa, Roadhog, Hammond to some extent, Winston to some extent, Doomfist, that's another one, you know, where they're very easily antied by an Ana, Kiriko is going to be needed. So Kiriko kind of coincides with Ana in that regard, and her ultimate is still pretty strong. It's not a team fight win button, but it definitely helps, and it's a very noticeable ultimate when used in the right situations. So Zenyatta, I'm putting at, for me, I'm putting him at C tier. And I think it's going to depend a little bit on, one, what rank you're playing at, two, what map you're playing at, and three, your team comp. If you're playing in a lower rank, your team is likely going to be taking more damage than a higher ranked game. That's number one. Number two, if you're playing on a little bit more of a longer ranged map, and there's a fair amount of longer range maps floating around out there right now, then you could make Zen work. But if it's a little bit more of a brawly, shorter range map, Zen might not be the greatest pick. The map that comes to mind when I say a little bit more of a shorter range brawly type map would be maybe like Ilios comes to mind. There's some other ones floating around out there, but that's the map that just pops into my head. And I'm not saying Zen can't work, but on like a Ilios type map, but there's probably going to be better hero choices in those situations. And then his ultimate is strong, but the problem with Zen, in my opinion, is he's very easy to kill. And in a world where there's a lot of snipers floating around out there, and there's a fair bit of dive coming from tanks at the moment, I still see Zen in a rough spot. But in the right hands, he can be deadly. If your team utilizes who you're putting the Discord orb on, Zen can be deadly. And if you're getting off good trances, Zen can definitely work. But it sort of does play hand in hand, kind of with what I said with Lucio in terms of what your team comp is. Say, for example, you have a Mercy on your team. You probably can't play Zen with a Mercy, and Mercy's going to be a fairly high-picked hero right now. If you play Zen with Kiriko, it's going to be a little rough, but you might be able to make that one work. And if you play Zen with an Ana, that should be able to work. But some of it's going to depend on what your tank is playing, what your DPS are doing. Are they utilizing the Discord orb, that kind of a thing? And it kind of plays hand in hand with what your team is doing. But in the right hands, Zen can definitely be deadly. So Sojourn for me is A tier. Even after the nerf, I still view her as pretty strong. She's not S tier anymore. I would have had her at S tier prior to the last nerf. So she did get, in my book, she got knocked down a peg, but I still view her as very strong. She's got high mobility. She can make space. The railgun shot is still strong if you utilize it correctly. It's just not an insta kill now like it used to be. But, if you whittle somebody down a little bit and then headshot them with it, they're still going to die. So I definitely still recommend Sojourn as a great hero to play if you're looking to play DPS. Ashe, for me, is a B tier hero. She's strong. And if you've got a Mercy pocket, she's a little stronger. I'm not a big fan of her ultimate, though. In higher rank games, especially, Bob is usually dealt with pretty easily, usually. With a lot of Anas floating around in games, Bob tends to just be slept. And if not higher rank games, they tend to focus Bob. In a lower rank game, you might be able to get a little bit more value out of Ashe's ultimate. Her dynamite can be strong if you're good at utilizing that. And she's a pseudo sniper, so she kind of fits into the meta as it stands now. But there's better sniper type characters out there at the moment. So she's not terrible, but she could be a little better. Or there could be a little bit better of a different heroes to pick, is I guess what I meant. In terms of Bastion, I'm also putting him in the B category. He can definitely be effective against. I view him as a tank buster character who is good for melting particular tanks. I view Roadhog as one of them and Winston as another one. When a Winston is a problem, in your games. And if people cry out to get a Reaper, I feel like that's kind of a old way of thinking, like an Overwatch 1 way of thinking. And Bastion, I think, is a better counter to Winston than Reaper is. Not that Reaper can't kill a Winston, but so where I'm going with that is, say like a Winston dives in, drops his dome down, you go into tank mode with Bastion, you melt the shield in a heartbeat, and all of a sudden the Winston's just left staring at a Bastion who he's not going to be able to do much damage to. Back when Roadhog was meta, if he hooked a tanked Bastion, Bastion eats that, and with a little bit of healing coming his way, he's back to being just fine again. Now that Roadhog's been nerfed a bit, that might lower Bastion, because before the Roadhog nerf, I probably would have had Bastion at A. Now I kind of drop him down to B just because some of the counters that he plays around with have been nerfed a bit. He can still be good, even against like a Doomfist. I could still see him working out pretty well. And he's a pseudo hit scan, so if Pharah or an Echo is a problem and you're struggling on the other hit scan characters, Bastion might work in a case like that. So in the right hands, Bastion's still a good character, but I think he's been dropped down a peg just based off of some of the other heroes and how they've been affected lately. Cassidy, I'm putting at C. If you're good at landing his magnetic grenade, he can be a strong character, but he's lacking in a lot of utility that a lot of other characters out there still provide. Sojourn with their mobility, for example, Genji with high mobility, Hanzo's got mobility, Reaper's got mobility, Junkrat's got mobility, Ashe even has that little shotgun blast. Cassidy's got that little tumbleweed roll that he does, and yeah, it reloads, and his ultimate's really not great. I mean, it can be okay, but it normally it's a little on the weaker side for ultimates. So, I mean, yeah, you point and you click, and if you can land his little magnetic grenade, okay, yeah, you might get a kill, but he's definitely not in the greatest of spots these days. But in the right hands, if you're good at clicking heads with them, or if there's a Pharah or an Echo giving you problems, Cassidy can still work. So he's not like in the worst spot in the world, but it's going to kind of have to be one of those situations where it has to kind of call for it versus just playing him all the time, kind of like what it was in Overwatch 1. Reaper. I'm going to kind of put Reaper in the same category as Cassidy. He does have some mobility and escapability, and he can be good at countering particular tanks. But I'm not a big fan of Reaper in a lot of situations. In the one-shot kind of sniper meta that we're in, Reaper's an easy kill for like a Widow to land a headshot, a Hanzo to land a headshot. And as I say the sniper meta, I haven't even brought up Kiriko, who's like a pseudo sniper when she lands headshots, and I can land headshots on Reaper fairly easily as a Kiriko. So Reaper is, again, another situational character. If the tank is like really pushing in on the front line and the front line's struggling with the tank, yeah, okay, then a Reaper can work. If the enemy team's not running a bunch of snipers or long range characters, okay, then a Reaper might be able to work. But again, it's a situational hero pick that I don't always see working, and I tend to see Reaper struggling, the ones that like come out of the gate as Reaper before they even know what they're up against. So I kind of put him, he's more of a situational character. I don't think I would change anything or buff Reaper. I think like his kit is fine. It's just in terms of where he ranks in the meta, it's just very situational. Tracer, same thing. I view her as a situational character. If there's supports that need to be dived on, then she can be all right. Say for example, you're playing Ana Lucio, and the Lucio's off doing his own thing, and Ana's left to her own devices. Playing Tracer might be really beneficial, because then you can kind of dive on the Ana, give her a hard time. However, if you're playing against like a pocketed, let's say, I don't know, a pocketed Sojourn and a pocketed Ashe, or some of the higher ranked DPS characters, even like maybe a Pharah or something like that, or a Hanzo or a Junkrat, Tracer might struggle against that. Like, what is she really going to be looking at for picks? Like, if the Mercy's flying around and jumping all over the place, Tracer might struggle against that. Her ultimate, kind of on the weak side. You can definitely get some good play of the game type kills with a Tracer Pulse Bomb, but it's definitely one of the higher end skill shot type ultimates. And it's a high risk, and kind of medium reward, because it depends where you land the sticky bomb. Like, say, for example, if you got a Zarya on your team and you combo it with a Grav, okay, you might get some good value out of it. If you're pulse bombing a tank, probably not going to get much value off of it. If you're missing your pulse bombs, then you're getting no value out of it. And there's so many high quality, easy to use ultimates in Overwatch that it makes Tracer kind of in a rough spot, honestly. I'd like to kind of actually see her pulse bomb reworked a little bit, just because of the risk reward factor to her pulse bomb. But that's the story for another day. But yeah, Tracer, I got her at C. Echo is a B for me. Echo can definitely be a strong character in the right hands, but she's kind of a hard hero to play. She's tricky to aim with. Her flying mechanics are good, but Pharah's can be a little bit better. However, she usually can take out Pharah's in a one-on-one type battle. So if you're playing in a game where Pharah is an issue, you might be able to take Pharah out by just dominating the air yourself with her. With that said, her ultimate is kind of unique, because then you gotta be good at the heroes the enemy team's playing to be able to echo them and then get good value out of it. But if you can echo, like, for example, a tank and get, like, say, a second Ramatra on the map, or a second Orisa or Junker Queen or what have you on the map, Echo can be very strong. And in the right hands, she's very oppressive. But it's a high skill character. You got to be good with her. And if you're not good with her, you're probably not going to be doing much with her. So it's kind of in the middle. But in the right hands, she can dominate a game. Hanzo, I'm putting at A tier. Hanzo's very strong, sniper, headshot, one kill type character. If you're good at landing the headshots, he's a strong character. He's got the mobility. He's got the wall climb. The dragon can be a little rough. Sometimes you can get creative with it. Say, for example, if a Mercy's going, say you get a pick and then you see the Mercy going for the res, you could dragon it and pick the Mercy, something like that. If you combo it with a Grav, then it's still strong. If you combo it with an Orisa ult, then, which is like a pseudo Grav, that can be really strong. But, it's one of those characters where you do kind of need to work with your team in terms of getting value out of his ultimate. But he's very strong with the remainder of his kit, that if you can land headshots with him, and then we didn't even talk about Storm Arrow. That's good for melting tanks. He's a good character. He's very strong right now. Same with Junkrat. I put Junkrat at A tier. The Tire, for example, is an extremely deadly ultimate. It's a very strong ultimate, in my opinion. With a Mercy pocket, he can definitely do some good damage. He's got some good combos in terms of getting quick picks. If you can land a left click and then all of a sudden you shift out a mine, and you've got the trap that floats around out there that can be hard to see when all the fights and chaos are going around. He's a strong hero to be playing right now. If you can get good at Junkrat, you can definitely carry games. We saw it in our last Symmetra VOD review. There was a good Junkrat in that game. The only thing I would say is you just got to be careful of playing him when there's Pharahs and Echoes floating around, but you can still make him work. It's going to get a little tricky. But Junkrat, very good character. Soldier, I'm going to put him at B tier. He's got mobility. He's got utility with the self-heal that can also heal people around him. And his ultimate can be good if he's got a Mercy pocket, or if he's going up against tanks that don't produce any kind of shielding. But with that said, he does more of the trickle damage as opposed to what the pseudo snipers are doing out there and the burst damage heroes are doing out there. So he's situationally good, but he's not, in my opinion, again, he's not one of the heroes I would recommend one tricking. But if you see, say, for example, Doomfist Diva, Junker Queen, Orisa, the Roadhogs, Zarya's, Hammonds, those kind of heroes in terms of enemy tanks floating around, the map's going to be pretty open in terms of a soldier ultimate, being able to shoot at the supports and the DPS that are out there. Soldier can be strong in those kind of situations just as long as the enemy's not running snipers and, picking you off in one shot. Torbjorn I view as a B tier. He can definitely be strong on particular maps that require taking space. His ultimate is all about taking space away from the enemy team. So King of the Hill maps, for example, Torb's ultimate can be very strong. If you put your turrets in good spots, say in the background area where they're not super easy to kill or there's going to be damage drop off when they're shooting at it, Torb's turret can definitely help in terms of mitigating some damage in terms of enemy damage going to the turret versus other people on the team. He's got some mobility utility when he does his Molten Core ability. He gets some speed. He picks up more armor. So he's got some tank ability and survivability to him. The problem with Torb, though, is he's an easy target to hit. He's very bulky, blocky type character. He's easy to one-shot with the sniper classes if you catch him when he isn't armored up. So he's, again, a little bit of a situational one. If you get really good with Torb, I used to one-trick Torb back in the days when I played a lot of Sim and Torb. You can definitely pick off Widows at a distance with Torbjorn, but you gotta get really good with his left click. And then his right click, ever since they buffed that a few patches back, his right click can be good for taking tanks down. So he can be strong in the right hands. But that's what I'm talking about. He's got to be in the right hands. And in the right hands, you could probably push him up to A tier, frankly, but there's a lot of Torbs out there that probably would struggle at out-sniping some of the snipers from a distance, mainly the Widowmaker is the one I'm talking about there. Hitting a Soldier, hitting a Hanzo, hitting Sojourn as Torb can be a little on the trickier side. Not impossible, but a little on the trickier side. But he's good for taking out Bastions, Reapers. Junkrat can be an easy one to hit. Obviously, all the tanks can be pretty easy to hit outside of maybe Junker Queen. I feel like Junker Queen's got a really small hitbox and might be a little on the difficult side. But, if there's a tank kind of a problem and the front line needs some help, Torb can definitely be one of those heroes that could maybe help with that. May I'm also putting at B. She's got some interesting utility that I don't think gets talked about enough. The ice wall can definitely be good for helping close space or take space, blocking off maybe a sniper who's got some a good sight line on the team, and maybe your team's not really playing anything to counter, say a Widow or a Hanzo who's like really dominating from afar, and you just have a team that's not swapping much, and maybe you're not really good at the sniper and far range heroes either. May can be kind of good for that. And the one thing I feel like May doesn't get talked about a lot is her ultimate can be good for countering a Ramatra ult. By freezing Ramatra when he's ulting, it can help, if you freeze a Ramatra and then everybody runs away from him, all of a sudden you've countered his ultimate. And then on top of that, if he's frozen, everybody can maybe shoot him and gun him down and that kind of a thing. But it's good for closing distance, or getting away, maybe not closing distance, but escaping a Ramatra ult. And then on top of that, her Ice Wall can be good for blocking a Ramatra ult to help break that line of sight. Because there's a lot of Ramatras floating around out there. And that's also, I should add too, why I have Junkrat in the A tier, because his Junkrat tire is great for countering Ramatra ults. And not all of these heroes are great for countering Ramatra ult, and his ult is really oppressive. So sometimes it's all about what these heroes can do versus what they're up against. And there's a lot of Ramatras floating around out there. And that's why I like kind of Mei at the B tier. Pharah, I'm also putting at B tier. With all the snipers floating around out there, when you get into the higher tier games, she can kind of be in a rough spot. In lower tier games, she's probably in a much better spot. And if you're going up against a team that doesn't run a lot of hit scans, or just aren't good at hit scan, Pharah can definitely be oppressive, especially with a mercy pocket. And there's plenty of mercies floating around out there. So Pharah can definitely be good with that mercy pocket, but you know, buyer beware on that one, because it is still a sniper meta. And if there's a sniper out there, it can be rough for a Pharah. If the Pharah can get the jump on the sniper, then maybe not so much, but it's kind of that weird intertwined, who's better at what kind of a situation. Genji. So Genji, I'm going to personally put at C tier. His blade is still strong, and there's a lot of Annas floating around out there. And I definitely think Genji in the right hands with the proper nano blades can definitely still carry games, carry fights. So don't get me wrong on that. But I feel like Genji can struggle against good snipers that are pocketed. If the Genji is just diving, say like Sojourn, Junkrat, Hanzo, Ashe, and they have a mercy pocket, I feel like he's going to struggle against the good players that have the proper support. If they don't have the proper support, Genji kind of moves up on the tier list a little bit. However, I view Genji as a little weak in the current meta unless you can get good blades off. If you can get good blades off, then in the right hands, he works. But I don't really like seeing Genjis when I know Sojourn is still strong, Hanzo is strong, Junkrat is strong. Kiriko, if she lands a good headshot on him, suddenly he's pretty low and his dive ability is kind of weak. And there's a lot of Kirikos floating around out there. There's a lot of Lucios and Moiras floating around out there. And Moira can definitely make Genji's life a little on the rougher side, potentially. So I view Genji as a little on the weaker side. But for any Genji mains watching, don't worry, I still see Blade as a strong situational ult, and with Nano Blade, he can still work, but it's a little bit, he's in a rougher spot these days. Widowmaker, I put at S tier, if you are good at her. If you are not good at her and you're just landing a bunch of body shots, then she goes into D tier. It's a complete skill shot. If you can land headshots with Widowmaker, you will carry games. You will carry games with the best of them, but you need to be able to land those headshots. But if you can, I got her at S tier. It's just as simple as that. Right now, there's a lot of space to be taken from snipers in a lot of long range maps. Kind of what I referenced before was the Zenyatta. It's open field day right now for Widowmakers if you can land the headshots, and that's all I'm going to say to that. Symmetra, C tier. She's in a rough spot. In lower tier games, I feel like you could probably make Sim work fairly well until you get into probably I'd probably say Plat 3 or Plat 4, and then that's where you're probably going to start struggling on making Sim work, unless you just happen to get a game where the team comps just make it work. She's got decent mobility with the teleporter, and the right click has made things a little bit more on the interesting side for her, being able to take down like a Pharah. But frankly, it goes back to the one-shot meta. Does Sim do it? No. Can she take out the long-range heroes that are doing it easily? Not really. Not saying you can't, but it's going to be a rough one, especially if they're pocketed. So Sim's in a rough spot. but in the right games where the team comps fit, you could probably make Sim work. If they're playing a shielded tank, you can definitely beam down, like say, for example, a Reinhardt and Dorado. We saw that in the VOD review I did last night. Sim can be strong there. Sim can also be strong against Orisa. Orisa can melt against a good Sim, and there are a lot of Orisas out there, so that's something to keep in mind. But again, it's also what the enemy DPS are doing. If they're not running the sniper classes that can pick you off in a shot, then Sim maybe kind of floats up into B tier. But with all the snipers floating around out there, I would not advocate playing a lot of Sim these days until some of these snipers kind of fall down on the list a bit. Sombra is D. She's in a rough spot. I don't see a reason to play Sombra right now, unless there is maybe like an oppressive Doomfist or Hammond that's giving your team a lot of trouble. Maybe you can make Sombra work then. Otherwise, I'm not seeing it. Maybe if your healers are really struggling and you need that self-heal with hacking a health pack. But there's so many better DPS choices floating around out there right now. Sombra, to me, is bottom of the barrel, right there with Brig. She needs help, and I'm frankly not really sure what kind of help you would give her at the moment, but she's in a rough spot. Excuse me. Doomfist. Doomfist I put at A tier. In the right hands, Doomfist can be very oppressive. He can get picks on the supports very easily in the right hands. The only thing I would say to that is if your Ana's good at landing sleeps and antis and your team peels for the Ana, then Doomfist might struggle a bit. But I view Doomfist as a strong tank. He's not quite as strong as he was. I think he got a nerf like, what was it, 2 patches ago or something like that, but he's still very strong. And definitely strong in the right hands. I like having Doomfists on my team, especially ones that dive the enemy supports. If I'm playing Kiriko, I can definitely kind of dive in with him a bit. If I'm playing Lucio with him, I can dive in a bit with him. Zenyatta can definitely work with a Doomfist. I like seeing Doomfists in my games. Diva I'll put at C tier. Diva is good when there are Pharahs flying around. Then I kind of like seeing Diva. What other heroes do I like seeing Diva for? Roadhog can be a maybe. Sigma can be a maybe. Bastion, like a good Bastion, can be a maybe. Torb, like if there's a really good Torb, then that could be a maybe. But generally speaking, Pharah is really the only kind of hero I really like seeing a Diva come out for. But I don't like seeing divas like a one-trick diva that just instantly goes diva. The one time, though, that I would advocate for maybe having a diva in your game is if the enemy team's not running any tanks that are running shields and the map might be open for good diva bombs. That might boost her up to a B tier maybe in that kind of a situation. But it can be easy to counter her ultimate. It can be easy to get out of line of sight of her ultimate. Say for example, if there's a Lucio on the team, you can beat drop a diva bomb and survive it, for example, and at pretty point blank range. So there's things you can do to counter her ultimate that make it a little on the weaker side. Her defense matrix is hit and miss in terms of what you would want to play diva for. Like a Reaper, for example, could be good for having a defense matrix for, because that counters his ultimate. It can be easy to counter a Mei ultimate with defense matrix. Torb can be another one, but it's situational. But in the world of the sniper, Diva is okay at diving the snipers. I feel like Winston is probably your best bet. That's just my personal opinion. But yeah, give me your thoughts and opinions on that one, because I feel like Diva's a little on the weaker side. Junker Queen I put at B tier. I view her as pretty strong in the right hands, but I see a lot of Junker Queens that feed. I see a lot of people that don't really play her well. Her knife kind of like hook ability is strong in the right hands. It definitely can dislodge people and put them in rough spots. With that said, though, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It's a hard shot to hit. So she's strong. If you can land left clicks very well, land headshots, the shout can be good if you use that at good times. She can be a strong tank, but it's a bit of there's a skill gap there that not everybody possesses. It's one of those heroes in the right hands, A tier. Otherwise, could be kind of a weaker tank. If you're playing her against, say, for example, a Ramatra or Reinhardt, a Sigma even, I view her as kind of a rougher spot to be in. Zarya too, frankly. If Zarya's got high charge, I think Zarya could kind of melt a Junker Queen. So it kind of depends what she's up against. And then if you're up against, like, say, for example, a Pharah and your DPS are struggling to take the Pharah out, Echo 2, Junker Queen might be okay for that if you can kind of close the distance. But if the Pharah's keeping distance, then maybe not. Orisa, I put her at S tier. She's probably hand in hand with another tank as the best tank to play right now. Very strong. A lot of different abilities that make her very strong. Orisa's definitely one of the best tanks to be playing right now. If you can get good at Orisa, you should definitely be able to climb on tank fairly easily, in my opinion. It's just a matter of if you can be good at Orisa or not. But yeah, Orisa's strong. She's got some speed mobility to her. Now, she's not great at necessarily getting into the face of some of the longer range DPS, but a lot of the DPS that I've got in the B and the C tier, she can dominate, take out. She should be good at getting into the faces of a lot of the supports, taking them out. Orisa's in a good place. Get good at playing Orisa, you'll go far. At least as it stands right now. Same with Ramatra. Ramatra's ultimate is the strongest ultimate, in my opinion, in the game right now if used correctly. If your supports are pocketing the ever-loving crap out of you on Ramatra, when you ultimate and when you ult at nearly full health, and when the enemy team is clumped together on King of the Hill maps, on push maps, on escort maps, and you ultimate, you've just activated your team fight win button. That's basically what that ultimate is. If there's a Junkrat that has Tire, then you probably don't want to use Ramatra's ult because that would be a hard counter. But, you know, same thing with like the Mei that I talked about. Maybe a Torb ult might be a problem, but if your supports are pocketing you, you should be able to eat a lot of that damage up, with the exception of a Junkrat Tire. Ramatra is a great tank to learn, and a great tank to definitely have a VOD review or two done on, to make sure you're using his ultimates correctly. But if you are using his ultimates correctly, he is a very oppressive tank. Reinhardt. I'll put Rein at A tier for one reason, and that is because Ramatra ults do not go through Rein shield, or any of the shields that are similar to Rein. So like the Winston bubble or the Sigma shield, or another Ramatra shield. But the problem with the majority of those shields, maybe not the Winston bubble, is that they're all very small. And the Winston bubble, because it's so big, tends to go down fairly quickly most of the time. So Reinhardt can be a counter to Ramatra in that sense. And there's a lot of Ramatras floating around out there. And because there's a lot of tanks that are floating around that can't block a Rein hammer down, Rein's ultimate is in a good spot. The problem with Rein, though, is he lacks mobility. He can't do much against a lot of the snipers that are floating around out there, aside from just, you know, make space in terms of with the shield. And his fire strike's a little on the weak side. and his charge can still kind of put him in a rough spot at times. But with more control to his charges, if you're good at Rein, you can definitely still carry games with him, but it's very circumstantial in terms of what he's up against and that kind of a thing. But I put him at A tier primarily because of his interaction with other Ramatras. That's why I view Rein as still a strong tank, but his interaction with a lot of other tanks might slide him down the tier list a little bit. Like, say, for example, him against a Doomfist. I wouldn't want a Rein against a Doomfist. Would I want a Rein against a Junker Queen? Not really. It kind of depends, but it kind of depends on who's playing them and how they're playing them, both on the Junker Queen and the Reinhardt side. But with the amount of Ramatras that I see in my games, I definitely think a Reinhardt can be strong in that type of a category, and that's why I put him at A tier. With Roadhog after the nerfs, I put him at C tier. I view Roadhog right now as pretty weak. And I'm kind of glad to see him kind of fall down on that list. I was pretty sick of the Roadhog meta. So Roadhog I see as a C tier. I have not seen an effective Roadhog since the nerf yet. Maybe there's some floating around out there that I haven't seen, but I view him as a weak tank right now. Roadhog's kind of in a rough spot. I don't really know of a good time to be playing Roadhog unless maybe like your supports are struggling to keep you up and you want to self-heal. Maybe for like a Hammond or a Winston. Yeah, I don't know, honestly. I feel like Roadhog's in a rough spot at the moment. And I kind of glad to see it. He's been at the top of the tier list for a long time. He deserves some time at the bottom. I don't think I would advocate them doing anything to Roadhog for a little while. Let some other tanks have their time to shine. I'm good with Roadhog where he's at the moment. Sigma, I put at B tier. Sigma can be strong in the right hands. If you can be good at landing your rock shots, getting a good stun off can definitely be strong. You can temporarily block a Ramatra ult, but his ultimate can be countered somewhat easily if there's a Lucio floating around, if there's some supports that are just pumping out a lot of heals. Sigma's in an okay spot. He's not the worst tank to play, but he's not the best tank to play either. And it kind of just depends what people are playing. But Sigma's all right. You know, he's all right. He can definitely kind of make a sniper's life hard because you can kind of put the shield in a rough spot to take maybe a good, sniper spot away from people. He outputs a lot of damage. And he's got some good survivability in the terms of, with his shield, his shift ability, that kind of a thing. But it has to be in the right circumstances. I don't advocate playing Sigma right now against, say, for example, a good Doomfist, a good Orisa. I feel like Sigma could potentially struggle there. Some of that's going to depend on what the DPS are running in those games too, though. But yeah, Sigma's in a pretty good spot for the most part. You could definitely probably one-trick Sigma if you're really good at landing his left clicks. That's going to be the real caveat to making Sigma ultimately work, because you really got to output a lot of damage with Sigma, and he's capable of doing it. Winston, I'm going to put at C tier. Winston is actually, you know what? I'm going to put him at B tier. I was about to make a point because, like, with all the snipers floating around out there, Winston can be good at taking the snipers out and making their life harder. But the Orisas, the Ramatras, the Doomfists, the Reinhardts of the world can make his life rough. There's a lot of Bastions floating around out there. I see a lot of Bastions in games that can make Winston's life rough, and that's kind of why I want to put him at C tier. I see him as a pseudo B C tier hero. he's kind of in the middle between those two, and it's a rough one. I almost want to put him at C tier, but I kind of, at times I can kind of talk myself into putting him B tier, and at times I kind of want to put him at C tier. In the right circumstances, he's B tier, and in the wrong circumstances, he's C tier. He's pseudo, in my opinion. But he's got his place in the meta currently. You know, when the snipers are being oppressive, he can be a hero to play to maybe kind of take them out of the game a little bit. But there's definitely a lot of hard counters to Winston that can be floating around in games that can drop him down a peg or two. So you got to be careful playing him. You definitely can't one-trick Winston. Why am I getting a phone call? Sorry about that. Next, we've got Hammond. Hammond is D tier. So Hammond is the weakest tank in the game right now. I've seen a few oppressive Hammonds that have carried games, but they're few and far between, and most maps don't benefit the Hammond pick. So Hammond's all right, but he's not great. There's a lot of better tanks to play than Hammond. If you're good at Hammond, say from like Overwatch 1 days, you might be able to make Hammond work. You might be able to one-trick him to make him maybe a C tier tank against good snipers. That might be a good tank to play potentially, but he's definitely not one that's going to make your team like you. It's not one that's going to make your team's life easier most of the time. Typically he plays well with Zenyatta. Zenyatta can be an okay hero to play, but he's not in the greatest spot. You know, I view Hammond as he's in a rough spot. His ultimate's not that great. Yeah, Hammond's in a rough spot right now. And then last but not least, we have Zarya. Zarya is B tier to me. If the enemy is shooting her bubbles and she gets a lot of charge, she can be strong. But she's not going to do a lot for a lot of the snipers that are floating around out there. And because she's not going to do a lot for that, she might be a little on the weaker side and she might not really fit in. If they're not running that and it's a little bit more of a brawly game, she can be very strong and she can carry the game. It's all about what is running in the game at the moment. But yeah, snipers can definitely kind of make Zarya not the strongest of tanks. Because she doesn't have a lot of mobility. If it's a brawly kind of game, King of the Hill type game, yeah, you can make a Zarya work. So, that's my tier list. And again, sorry for the phone call noise that came in toward the end. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If there's a hero you agree with, disagree with, if you want to make an argument for a hero being higher or lower, feel free to post comments and we can have discussions about that. So thank you guys for watching and I'll catch you on the next one.